I think on the simplest way, a rite of passage or initiation to fatherhood is just adjusting into what life requires of you now, right? Mm-hmm. What I think is possible and what I get excited about is that with a little bit of community or foresight or intention around it, it can be an opportunity to really explore your potential as a human because it is asking so much of you.
Welcome to Startup Dad, the podcast where we dive deep into the lives of dads who are also leaders in the world of startups and business. I'm your host, Adam Fishman. In today's conversation, I sat down with Dan Doty. Dan is the founder of Fatherhood Unlocked, a company that is helping dads win at work, build deeper family connections, and thrive in relationships. He's also a writer, a wilderness guide, and has been an inner-city high school teacher. Through his work, Dan is at the forefront of the global men's movement to help dads be better at all aspects of life. His most recent project, Fatherhood Ready, is a course and community that helps prepare men for fatherhood. He's also a husband and the father of 3 kids. In our conversation today, we spoke about the exciting and historical change in the role of fatherhood that is happening right now. The differences between how we were raised by our fathers and they were raised by theirs. We discussed how the transition into fatherhood is an important initiation or rite of passage, and how to parent in the time of both great technical and societal change. I hope you enjoy today's conversation with Dan Doty. I would like to welcome Dan Doty to the Startup Dad podcast. Dan, pleasure having you here today, and I think I nailed that pronunciation of your name, so feeling pretty good about myself.
Crushed it. Thanks for having me, man.
All right, well, we're talking about fatherhood today, but first, Dan, you have a really interesting professional background. So could you tell me and our listeners a little bit about what you do here for work?
Yeah. Well, I'll make the beginning really simple. So right now, my main offering, along with the old colleague of yours, John McBride, we are building and have built a platform to support expecting and new dads with all of the practical and deeper layers of what it takes to be a good partner through this period. So that's called Fatherhood Ready. That's what I'm doing now. I'm also an executive coach. I support teams. I support leaders and CEOs. It's my day job. But yeah, my background, I'll try to do this very succinctly because it's kind of windy, right? Right after university and college, I became a wilderness therapy guide, and I spent about 5 years climbing mountains and paddling rivers with disaffected youth, male youth, right? So struggling teen boys, and just found a calling, found a passion, found a path at a very young age myself. And that really has been my North Star through my windy career. I've also been a inner city high school teacher in the Bronx. I had a run in TV. I became the producer and director of a hit show called Meat Eater, which is on Netflix. It's a hunting and adventure and food show. And then I was the co-founder of Everyman, which is a men's work organization that teaches and sort of brings forth men's capacity for relationship building, empathy, and emotional skill sets. There's a bunch of other stuff in between. Those are the headlines. But yeah, the North Star started as a young man, really seeing behind the curtains of men's mental health from a very, very close up point of view. And I've been sort of tracking towards supporting that individually and familially and societally ever since.
Wow. That's awesome. And there's been a lot of, I don't know if headlines is the right way to think about it, but there's been a lot talked about the boys and the men are not all right. There's a loneliness epidemic amongst many other things. And so I guess, what has been kind of the most surprising aspects of your work in Everyman? You're kind of working with kids and now Fatherhood Ready. Are you finding that there is a growing group of folks who are ready to kind of be open about this stuff and have these conversations? Or are you still finding some resistance? Does it take time to break through with folks?
Both, yes. And I think to all of that, right? And I think maybe if you ask what's most surprising, I think what is most surprising is still being faced with I mean, if you ask any individual in this country or on this continent, if any of the men or males in their inner circle are struggling, generally you get a yes, let me tell you the whole story, right?
Mm-hmm.
You juxtapose that or sort of contrast that with the societal, let's just call it I don't know, freeze response or rigidity or fear of being honest about this, trying to address it, right? There's a big gap between like actually turning toward what really is a crisis of boys and men, right? And this has been around for a long time. But yes, I would affirm what you were saying that there has been momentum building in terms of it becoming more mainstream, more okay to talk about. And I think there's been some recent voices. Richard Reeves has a great book out in the last couple of years. And just, I guess, more of a simple, factual, less emotionally charged way of talking about it, which I think is really good news for everybody. But yeah, man, it's been such an interesting journey to be behind the veil, behind the curtain of men's lives and boys' lives for really 20 years now. Right? It's 20 years since I started doing the work in the wilderness. And so I feel like I've had this really like upfront, intimate portrait of masculinity in our culture. And I've just been kind of like finding my way in different ways to support and express and educate all along the way.
Well, I'm glad that you're here doing that work. We need more of that. So I'm curious, do you feel like you were always destined to do this work? Like, what was life like growing up? Did you have some sort of childhood training for this that you didn't appreciate at the time?
That's a great question. It certainly is personal, right? I think just a snapshot of me as a child and I think my familial dynamics, like I loved the shit out of my dad. And there was this giant gap of intimacy and this wanting on my part of more closeness or more emotional intimacy with him. But I didn't even know it when I was young, right? Like as I got older, I could look back and say, oh yeah. But at the same time, he was there and he loved me and he was proud of me. So I had I had my own experience of both feeling very close to my dad, but also feeling the distance between us as well. But I don't know, was I destined to do this in some way? I mean, I was a weird kid. Like I was a very sensitive kid. I was probably would have enjoyed being taught to meditate at a very young age, right? Like I think I was in some ways, I don't know, a little bit outside the norm. But at the same time, I found martial arts as a young man, had a really strong mentor in martial arts, had a really strong mentor when I was in my teens. I worked on a pig farm. I grew up in North Dakota, right? I grew up in like tiny town farm country. I spent a lot of time with dudes, and then I think, yeah, it really was that experience right after college when I kind of stumbled into the field of wilderness therapy and literally spent 5 years in groups of dudes, right? And it's just, I don't know, I think I built the muscles at that point. But it made sense, like what I was seeing immediately. Let me just tell one quick anecdote. In that context, like imagine being in the wilderness of the mountains of Utah, and having spent, 80 days with a young man, and then his father flies in from New York City, goes to REI, picks up a new sleeping bag, and then hikes in to spend 10 days with this young man who's been doing deep introspective work. And watching that dad hike into the site and like literally watching that boy's posture and body language bristle, like almost hearing the hair on the back of his neck stand up and just feeling this tension between father and son. But then over the course of working together, watching that tension relax and seeing those two truly find each other and express their love for each other and express the truth of what's going on with each other. That's what got me. And I don't feel like I gave the most cinematic version of that this time, but it was something in the refinding of father and son that like cemented this path for me. It was so fucking powerful every time it happened.
Yeah. There are a couple flavors of sort of men and boys in the wilderness. There's the one that is closer to what you describe, which is like reconnecting, introspection, doing like, work on yourself. And then there's the like warrior journey. We go hunt a thing, we kill something with our bare hands, we like start fires and build tents and stuff like that. Like Are you balancing both of those? Do you think that both of those are necessary, or you tend to lean more into the first one?
See, I like them both together. That's my
Okay.
style, right? So
Okay.
I actually, every year I run a couple first-time hunting camps for men and
Cool.
take them on a rite of passage and initiation to become a non-hunter, to become a hunter. And, so those introspective trips I was talking about, we also, hiked 10 miles a day and built fires without lighters or matches. And so it did integrate both. And I think, there's definitely like a cultural meme about this, I don't know, rah warrior, kind of almost feels like you're playing at something, playing at a certain type of masculinity. And I think it's easy to sort of build that image. And certainly there are programs that have that ethos and that energy behind them. But my preference is, just take a simple backcountry hiking, backpacking trip, right? Like that is hardcore enough, stressful enough, brutal enough for literally anyone who ever does it to get your dose of. So I actually think those things package together naturally, right? The introspection happens when you're halfway up a 3,000-foot incline hike, right? So I guess here's what I would say. My experience with men is that we have a really wide spectrum of humanity and possible experiences and possible life to live, right? And I feel like we often live a pretty narrow band of what's possible, right? A lot of men don't lean too heavily into the relational world or the emotional world, but a lot of men also don't lean very heavily into their self-reliance and the different things. So to me, it's just this like really nice, wide open spectrum of possibility of experiences to sort of become accustomed to or become fluent in.
Yeah, I love that balance there too. So I want to transition and talk a little bit about your life now, your non-professional life. Tell me about your family. You have a partner and you have a handful of kids. And I'm curious how you and your partner met each other. Was it on a pig farm in North Dakota or out in the wilderness?
We met on Match.com in New York City.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 10 years ago.
That is the most surprising answer you could have given me, actually, based on this conversation.
Yeah, we met on Match 10 years ago. I was 32 and I was in the TV world at the time, in the media world. And shortly after, actually, as I was meeting her, I was just planning my exit from New York. I worked for 0.0 Productions, which made Anthony Bourdain's sort of TV world. And
yeah,
I opened a office for them in Montana, honestly, because all of the camera guys that I was hiring from the East Coast kept breaking their hands and feet on our shoots. So I had to go to Montana to hire mountain producers.
Yeah, hire some people who could do the job.
Yeah. So I just a month before I met my wife made the decision to move to Montana. And yeah, we met and we got married within 9 months of meeting each other, which was both a terrible idea and maybe the only good idea too at the same time. But we moved to Montana and we had our first child, Duke, who's now 8, I guess like 14, 15, 16 months after that. So we just got down to having a family pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And I have 3. We got 3 kids.
Cool. And they all seem to be pretty evenly spaced. They're like all 3 years apart from one another. It looks like I think you said 8, 5, and 2.
8, 5, and 2. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. And just yesterday, they got dropped off at the same school for the first time ever. So we have one drop off, which for you dads out there, it's a big deal.
Oh, huge. Congratulations. That is a major milestone.
Yeah.
So you and your partner met each other and got hitched pretty quickly and then started a family pretty quickly thereafter. A lot of people go slower on that. They take a lot of time. I took, 7 years, I think, to get engaged and married to my wife.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you fast tracked many of the conversations that couples have, but what was the decision like for the two of you to start a family together? Did you talk about that a lot before getting together?
We did, and I actually think it was probably the driving force of us fast tracking the entire project. Actually, I'm really curious if there's any other guys that resonate with this, but I was just very excited to have kids. I always knew I wanted kids. And when I was in my late 20s, I started feeling a little bit of anxiety. I'm like, oh man, like when do I want to do this? I feel this urge to not wait too long. And actually, I joined my first men's group in New York City. I think I was 27. And I was the youngest guy by far. And most of the dudes were late 30s or 40s or even 50s. And I actually don't know if I ever said this out loud to them, but there was a handful of dudes in their 40s or maybe like high 30s that were single, no families. And there was something in me that when I like looked at that, I'm like, fuck, that's not what I want. Right.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh shit, like that's not what I want. So I actually moved in Brooklyn with a couple friends of mine who had one kid and who were about to have another, because I realized I'd never held a baby in my entire life. I knew nothing about little kids. I'd worked with teens, right? I had experience working with teens, but knew literally nothing about little kids. So I was actually pretty, I was like, it was a bit of my mission at the time. Like I wanted to find a partner. I wanted to have kids. So I met Elise, my wife's name, and she was at the same place, right? I just think we were both so ready. And so did we have the conversations? Yes. And there were probably 500 we should have also had. That's actually, I love that question. It's actually one of the things that we're doing in Fatherhood Ready. So we have this online course, and it is literally a conversation guide for expecting parents and soon to be parents, and kind of empowering dads to lead those conversations or be aware of those conversations is a really meaningful thing for us and for me.
It's a really good perspective to kind of help nudge or empower dads in that direction, because I feel like societally, that's often not how we think these things progress. It feels like oftentimes the men in the relationship are kind of dragged kicking and screaming into it because they're like, I got to give up my golf game or whatever. But I know, part of the reason I started this pod, and probably a lot of the reason you started Fatherhood Ready, is like, we know there are people out there that don't subscribe to that theory, that like want to lead the charge or be involved or be part of the decision making, and giving them the tools to do that is pretty important.
Not only are there, men and dads that want to, what I observe is like what I would honestly, maybe this is somewhat hyperbolic, but I actually don't think so. I think we are in the midst of a truly historical human transition when it comes to parenting roles, and the mandate that is sort of bubbling up from moms for dads to really fully partner and lean in across the spectrum of what parenting requires. And our dad's sort of answer to that call, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at it generationally, right? Like what is happening with you and I in our homes, I'm assuming is fundamentally different than what your home growing up, but at least societally, that is the norm. And also just take the image of the birth or the birth room, right? Like my dad was at my birth, and I think that was the norm. The generation before, dads weren't even really allowed in the room.
Sitting out in the waiting room smoking cigarettes, probably.
Right? Exactly.
Like that was the thing.
But today, men and dads are primary birth partner, primary birth support. And like, I want to slow that down because I want to try to emphasize how big of a fucking deal that is, how huge of a shift. Like as long as humans have, as far as we can tell, as long as humans have been around, this is new, right? This new situation is new now, like it's just hitting. And the gap of experience and modeling and skills and even just identity on the part of dads it's really meaningful, right? It's a really meaningful gap. Yeah. So I could envision my children, like my boys, if they become dads, which they want to, which I think is rad, them having an easeful on-ramp to partnership in parenting and family. But I think this generation of us we're kind of saddled with some substantial transitional work, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we're working to address. And I think it's super exciting though. I think it's good news for everybody, honestly.
Yeah. So you obviously are somebody who's helping to lead this charge in this transition, and because like dads today, folks like you and me, Like, we can't go to our fathers and be like, hey, how does this work? Because they're like, well, I don't know. I never changed a diaper, which is actually true of a lot of like our parents. Like, the men never changed a diaper, and it was even more removed before that, as we just discussed. But what do you think is the driving force? I mean, you mentioned moms demanding it, but do you think there's something else? Is it conversations happening in society? Is it the media we consume? Like, what else do you think is kind of driving this historical change that we're seeing in this transition point?
Honestly, I think this is just a guess. Two things I'll name. So one, I think that there has been a critical mass of men who didn't go to war for long enough to honestly just have this space for men in general as a conglomerate to have the space to begin to come home and heal, and maybe not just war, but just like the general survival needs of humanity. My hunch is like it kind of took until my post-World War II grandfather and dad. I mean, and again, this is not a scientific explanation, but I do think there's something about the general safety in Western culture in maybe the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, probably buffeted by the psychedelic sort of revolution in the 60s. And then also the second main thing I would name would just be the kind of like the fruition and maturation of the feminist movement in the past, 60 years. Mm-hmm. One resource I love to name, and if anybody takes it up, I think it's a worthwhile read. One of the best books to give the fundamentals of this whole situation with boys and men is called The Will to Change by Bell Hooks, the prolific feminist author and leader. And her loving portrait of how our society impacts men and boys to the negative is, I think it's necessary reading for parents of boys. So yeah, man, I mean, it's big stuff, it's big stuff. And I don't know, that's my sort of current best answer.
Yeah. And those are, I mean, big macro changes that are happening that had taken years, decades even.
Well, it might be tech too, man. I think about this, if, as AI and tech continues to proliferate, and if it does sort of mean that we have more time, my hope is it brings more humanity out of us. And I think for dads, I mean, humanity and fatherhood are kissing cousins, I think,
Yeah. And we'll talk about tech a little bit later too. But the other piece is just the world is so much more connected now that information flows so much more quickly. So if somebody's doing something, people can tap into that all around the world, like Fatherhood Ready, for example, or this podcast, or, any number of things. And so, there's just, for better or for worse, ideas disseminate quite quickly.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I wanted to ask you, you described your wife, Elise, you said you mentioned her name is, right? Mm-hmm. As a spiritual guide and intuitive. Mm-hmm. Tell me what that means. Tell me more about that.
So she practices I would say, unknown modality called SRT. It's spiritual response therapy. And it's a method of researching and working with the subconscious. So she has a counseling practice, not like a licensed counseling practice, but a spiritual counseling practice, and sees clients one-on-one and has some group programs and stuff. And yeah, man, she's a gardening, earthy, wild spiritual woman. And it's fucking fantastic, right? I mean, we live we live in the woods in Maine. We moved here from California in 2020. And there's a lot about our lives that we're at least like mainstream adjacent, right? We've stepped away from the corporate world for the most part. And what I would say more than any, if I were to make one really clear statement about my wife, is I don't know that I could have married a better fit in terms of a parenting partner. Like, she is just simply a fantastic mom, like through and through. I mean, she has her issues. I have my issues, right? We all do, but she's a absolutely fantastic mom. And, you ask about her career, but we've really heavily invested in her being present and home with our kids these young years. So she's had to restart, and kind of close down and reopen her business consistently for the past, 6 years. So
yeah. And that's quite a level of effort and sacrifice too. All those stops and starts. Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned you couldn't have found a better fit because you also, again, like we discussed, went from 9 months to like, here's a person. Wow, let's get married. So, did you have a sense of that? You must have had a sense.
I did.
Obviously, you probably wouldn't have gotten married in 9 months, but yeah, you must have had this feeling that like we're on the same wavelength, me and this partner.
Yeah. So my wife, prior to what she does professionally now, so she was a professional singer. She toured with the pop singer Jason Mraz on some big tours, but right before I met her, what she did is her dad's side of the family is from Martha's Vineyard for like 12 generations, and she was living in LA. She went back to the vineyard to visit family and found that her grandma, who was 98 or 99, needed more help than she was getting. So she moved in, she gave everything up, and she became her grandma's caretaker for like 18 months. And she had done that right before she moved to New York when I met her. And so within that 9 months of meeting her, we went to visit her family. And not only did I see her with her grandma, who she was a caretaker for, but also some of her cousins. And I not only had the feeling that she would be a good mom and there was something there, but I actually watched her engage with kids. And I honestly was just really impressed and have been ever since. That there was something in there that I didn't know about or have, which was she's really great at holding boundaries with kids. It's not that I'm not good at that, but I think I don't know. There's something about that I observed early on that I was like, okay, like she's got some skills here.
Yeah. So you have been a dad now for 8 and change years. What is the earliest memory that you have after becoming a dad?
It is just those first moments. So I remember Elisa's labor with Duke went for a long time and was complicated. We started out at home. We transferred to the hospital after about 20 hours. And we found out, he had the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, which he was okay the whole time, but it was still sort of tense.
Yeah.
The first thing I remember from is that the moment you become a dad when they actually come out into the air? Maybe, I don't know, whatever that moment is. But seeing the first glimpse I saw of him was the unwinding of this umbilical cord from around his neck, which was startling. It's a startling thing to see a newborn the first time also. That is seared into my memory. The second thing that's seared into my memory, and I don't remember if this is accurate in time, but was like a wave of blood, like literally like a whoosh on the bed and like splashed on the floor and like splashed on my leg. And I was like, holy shit. So there's these like very visceral snapshots of the actual birthing process. But I guess like the dramatic sort of beautiful one is that I was on my wife's right side when he was born. As soon as he came out and was on her chest, I walked around to the other side of the bed and got down right over her shoulder. And I'd been talking to him for months. And I just said something like, hey man, or hey Duke, like I'm your dad. I've been waiting to meet you for so long. And then, so I didn't know this was possible, but he craned his neck up and he met my eyes. And I like lost it.
Yeah.
I freaking lost it. I didn't know that, like, I didn't know they had the strength. I didn't know that was a thing, but he literally like looked up and met eyes with me, man. And
that's so
that
cool.
was it.
That's so cool. When you think about now having 3 kids, one of the things I think dads don't talk a lot about, although I bet in your circles, maybe you do talk a little bit about this, is the feelings and the emotions that come with becoming a father for the first time, the second time, the third time. Did you notice differences between your kids around some of the emotions that arose for you or, as you kind of went along in your journey?
I think so. The first thing that comes up is I clearly got my ass kicked more and more with each kid that came, by life, right? Like by everything. And I think that when it comes to like bonding or connecting with each of the 3, I do think that there was a different experience I had. My daughter's name is Wilderness. She's our youngest. Having a daughter was a different experience than having two sons. And again, I can make up a narrative like I've spent my life mostly with dudes. I didn't have a sister. I had a brother, not a sister. And, most of the women in my life that I've been close with have either been my mom or, romantic partners, right? And so there was something different there. But in the background, there was also an intensification of panic and overwhelm that happened progressively with each kid.
It heightened with each kid, it sounds like.
It expanded. It exponentially grew a little bit. Yeah.
You described this transition into fatherhood as sort of a form of initiation or a rite of passage. I don't know that every dad thinks about it in that way, but that resonates with me. And I'm curious what that meant to you and how you've helped dads see it in that way.
I love the timing of this question because, just to frame it out, right? What a rite of passage is either forced or natural sort of ceremony, or what would you say? Just like a course of events that takes you from one stage of life to the next, or one stage of maturation to the next, right? The reason I like answering this today is that I literally think like last week, I think I don't know. I'm in the process of something happening right now. I just took a month off for the first time since I've been a dad. Mm-hmm. And part of that was like a 2-week meditation retreat. And honestly, as much as fatherhood has been literally the greatest joy of my life, like I've also not been okay for the last 7 years. Mm-hmm. Like it's this paradoxical both thing, right? Like, so what I'm coming around to is like an initiation or a rite of passage traditionally is sort of run or facilitated by a group of elders or a group within your community to really clearly appoint you as part of the community in a new light, in a new role. Mm-hmm. And we don't do this in our culture, right? And what some of the old time wisdomy folks would say is that if the community doesn't initiate you, life will, right? And I think what's happening is that fatherhood is unofficially initiating men in its own wild way. Mm-hmm. And I think some of it's just simply practical, right? Like once you have humans who you are fully responsible for, things just like fall into a new way of being. You understand things differently. You see the world differently. You have to hold yourself differently. You have to manage your time differently. And you have to like either be forced to these adjustments or maybe be somewhat aware of them as they happen, right? So I think on the simplest way, a rite of passage or initiation to fatherhood is just adjusting into what life requires of you now, right? Mm-hmm. What I think is possible and what I get excited about is that with a little bit of community or foresight or intention around it, it can be an opportunity to really like explore your potential as a human, because it is asking so much of you, right? I think fatherhood asks or requires you to be on point with your game playing or your doing, right? So whether that's money or work or logistics or home or whatever it is, like you got to get it done, right? That's part of it. Another big part of it is fatherhood. Again, maybe it doesn't demand it, but it can evoke more connection, more ability to be present, more facility with our ability to give and receive love, the being side of life, the relating side of life, the eulogy part of life that you want to do. So I think fatherhood is a crucible that there's no better accountability system for our own maturation and growth, in my opinion, because it's like every single day my kids are reflecting and absorbing who I am, and I can turn a blind eye and like not pay attention and not see how I'm hurting them or not see how I'm whatever, or I can take the feedback and use it as a lever to grow from.
Yeah. And that gets to a point that whenever anyone turns the question around and is like, what's the most important, piece of parenting advice you would give someone? Not that I've mastered this by any stretch, but I always talk about modeling behavior, and that what you just mentioned around your kids absorbing and watching, and you can turn a blind eye to that, or you can lean into it. That kind of gets back to that single piece of advice that I always have for folks.
Yeah, man, parenting's not a cognitive activity, right? We can read books and think we're doing things a certain way, but how we show up and who we actually, and you can't fake that shit, right?
Yeah.
You just can't fake it. Who you actually are is what's programming your child's life, right?
Yeah. So in Fatherhood Ready, you mentioned you're kind of helping prepare people for fatherhood, prepare people for the arrival of a kid, maybe even just getting into the right frame of mind around becoming a father. And so that likely is filled with lots of advice and lived experience and things like that. And so if you could rewind the clock to, 8 and change years ago before you had Duke, what advice would you have given the younger Dan around this journey that you're about to go on?
A bunch of practical stuff. I would have sat myself down and said, listen to me, dude, there's some things you need to take care of. It's really funny, right? So we have a baby prep planner that we offer as one of our simple products. And it's just exact, there's a kind of a joke in the world. Guys just tell me what to do, right? Give me a list. So we made one, right? Yeah. So it's 45 things you need to do before baby comes, 66 products that we've vetted that, go buy them, and then a packing list for the thing, right? But so I use that as an example, but what I personally did need more of was nuts and bolts, right? I mean, maybe you can tell from my answers, right? So my life has been about deep spiritual inquiry and adventures in the wild and human connection and all this. And I've been able to make a living off of this the whole way, right? But I was not educated, aware, or prepared for the weight of home, finance, work, just all of that. And it's not the language that I'm fluent in naturally, right?
Yeah.
And so I would have been like, dude, save some, pardon my French, save some fucking money, get your stuff in order, right? Yeah. And that's what we're finding, right? Working with dads is that it really is like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you don't have the basics in place, what you're talking, the modeling behavior, the being present, you can still do it, but man, it's 10 times harder, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's what I needed. That's what I would have benefited from immensely.
Yeah. On the flip side of that, is there a piece of advice that you got from outside that if you could go back in time, you'd tell yourself to completely ignore?
Man, nothing comes to mind. The best advice, I'll tell you the best advice real quickly, was to take 3+ months off. And that I listen to and I pass on everywhere I go. Yeah. I think that was just the best advice I could have ever got.
Yeah.
No, I don't know, man. Nothing. Maybe, I don't know. I guess just generally anybody's opinion on feeding we didn't take it to heart, right? So we did home birth and I guess just the more hippie route of birth and parenting, but there was definitely plenty of advice levied that I think mostly we just shrugged it off.
Yep. This is a bit of a pivot, but what's your favorite book to read to your kids? And has that changed with each subsequent kid?
Man, I would say since moving to Maine, my favorite is, what's it called? It's about this fisherman and his pink boat, the Tiddly Italy. So it's a story about a kind of like a poor, funny, quirky fisherman who has a boat that barely works. And he goes out on the ocean and a whale comes to him with a boo-boo on its tail. And so he puts a Band-Aid on its tail and then he gets eaten by the whale. And then he lights a fire or something in his belly to get spit out. And then he comes back and there's 100 whales and they all want Band-Aids or something. It's wild. It's like a very far out, adventurous, it's fun. It's a lot of fun. We we have a tradition of telling stories, right? So I write fiction and I've written fiction and I love to make up stories too. And that's been a tradition we've done with all the kids. And so probably At times we would do it every night. Probably now it's once or twice a week. But right now, all three kids are sleeping in the same room. So I'll start a story, make up a character and a time and a plot, and then we'll take turns going around the room and like pushing the story a little bit further and a little bit further. And man, that's just like, that fulfills me to the ends of the earth. And we got a couple of them, 3 or 4. We've got one called The Cactus Pile that I would love to actually turn into a kid's book because we've now told it probably 250 times.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah. Great fodder for future writing. I know with Fatherhood Ready, you got a lot of practical advice for people. I don't know if you're also like a frameworks guy. I talk to a lot of tech people, and we love our frameworks in tech. So I don't know if you developed any particular frameworks or guardrails for parenting.
Well, yeah, you're probably sensing I'm traditionally not a super framework guy, but John McBride, my business partner, is.
He is, yes.
Much more of a framework guy. And I would say what we've developed to date that's basic and simple and really functional is the framework of our Fatherhood Ready course, which is the prep course. And so it's split into basically 3 main modules, right? And so the first module is like basically the bottom block of Maslow's hierarchy. It is like, what do you need to know? What do you need to do to be a great partner during pregnancy, a great partner during birth, and a great postpartum partner, right? So it's just like, get informed, dude. That's sort of line 1. Line 2 is invest in your relationship and your partnership in preparation. And so we have a full-on module that has the conversation guide and tips and tactics to really strengthen one's relationship, which I think and we think is there's a lot of space in that. That's a really critical thing that, the first either 2 or 4 years of baby's life has the highest rate of divorce. Actually, when babies come and then when they leave the house, those are the 2 times statistically that most divorces happen. So investing in the relationship and taking lead on strengthening that is module 2. And then the third pillar or third module is self-reflection and inquiry. That would be, how are you parented? What are your values? What's your vision for yourself as your dad? So that's a little bit of the self-initiation route there. So that's, I would say that qualifies as a framework. We need to learn and get up to speed on what we need to do, and then invest in relationship and invest in self is kind of like the playbook to start with.
Love that. Yeah. Speaking of investing in your partner, we've talked a lot about how Elise and you are a really good fit for each other. And partnership is super important when it comes to parenting. But on the flip side, I also know that it's hard to agree 100% of the time with your partner. Is there a particular area where you and Elise don't agree or don't exactly see eye to eye?
We're pretty close, man, when it comes to parenting. I mean, there's some things that I go along with and kind of have to take a deep breath on. Just 2 days ago, we have to have water bottles for the kids at school every day, right? Yeah. And it's just, they lose them and they're stashed places. And it's always just like, we don't have enough water bottles.
Right.
Like my mom just sent us some water bottles for the kids, but Elise stacked them and said, okay, these are for donation. We don't use plastic water bottles. And I'm just like, fuck. I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm like, okay. But we just got enough finally, right? So there's little things like this, maybe I would take them through a fast food drive-through like twice a month, but she would be once, right? But not far. Like we're not far. But when it comes to like education and just house rules and things like that, we're pretty damn aligned.
That's great.
We're pretty aligned, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we're living in a really interesting time. Not only this kind of transitional like phase that society is going through with men and fatherhood, but also there's a lot of technological change happening right now. You mentioned AI, and that's a coming wave. It's becoming a big part of the zeitgeist and the conversation, at least around parenting circles and school and things like that. How do you think the role of parenting and fathering is going to change, or may already be changing in this time of AI and all of the social changes happening around us and to us?
Yeah. I think it's that moment of like, holy shit, it's changed already. It is changing, but we can't quite nail it down as to where things are necessarily. I think it's hard to answer that without first just briefly addressing the last, I don't know, 12 years, 14 years of social media plus smartphones and what that change has done. Because I think, now we have some data back on what that has done to our kids and what it's doing to our kids very clearly. And it's hard to, I brought together about 100 parents in January of this year. So what is that, 9 months ago, and just had sort of an open forum around AI and parenting. And it was really eye-opening. And, what I got from that is parents are really concerned and scared. And there's different camps, right? There's the like, we're into whatever AI tutor system and we want to give our kids the best, knowledge access that anyone has ever had. And I can't fucking wait. And then you got people who are like, I actually might go off grid and never see you again,
Yeah.
And I would say my wife and I, we're right in the middle there of, I feel like really over-indexing on nature time and human connection and like good, healthy practices of living, in addition to, I don't want my kids to not have access or not be fluent in that world, because it does seem like that is the world that's building around us.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say. Like, I try to take in enough viewpoints around this to not go down any rabbit holes too far. But I do personally have strong concern about the world of, personal AI tutors and where that can and would go in terms of having a potentially outsized impact on shaping our kids that could supersede family and parents. I do have some concerns about that. I don't really know what to do with those concerns other than stay as, I don't know, up to date and grounded in it. And actually, one of the guys on the call who was at Google for a long time, and actually what he shared on that call was even more frightening. He's like, listen, you guys are scared about AI, but what's coming behind AI is, 10 magnitudes beyond AI, and like, just fucking wait. Basically, he's like, you're sweating the wrong things. I was like, oh geez. But he did have a practical tip that I really took to heart, which was any tech that comes into your home, as a parent, to fully engage with it along with your kid and not just sort of pass it off for them to engage with without knowing what the fuck is happening, right?
Yeah.
Without actually being. And that really landed for me. And so it's been a practice this year, if we get a new app or whatever it is, to make sure that I'm taking the time, or my wife is taking the time, to really know what's going on so that we're not just being a pass-through mechanism.
Yeah. That is really solid advice. And it might take you longer. Kids pick up stuff really quickly, but to educate yourself so you at least know how your kids are spending their time, what they're consuming, what they're looking at, all that sort of stuff. That is a really solid piece of advice. Have you felt like you've had to give up anything to become a father? I mean, I'm sure your priorities have changed. Obviously, we talked about that.
Yeah.
But what's something that you, like old Dan, pre-kids Dan, just doesn't do anymore that post-kids Dan does?
One main thing, which I kind of alluded to when you asked me about the initiation question, was 2 weeks ago, I went on my first 8-day meditation retreat in 6 years. And consequently, I feel more myself and feel better than I have in probably 6 years. That's one thing. I started meditating when I was in my mid to late 20s and was very, very devoted. It was a very, very big part of my life. And it remained so. It's interesting. I just recently got the clarity about this. But, when Duke came, first kid came, I kept up a pretty strong practice, was pretty tied in. And then Jude came and it was probably, I don't know, fell by 50%. And then when Wilderness came and had 3 kids, I pretty much just stopped. I really kind of lost the thread for quite a while and was aware of it. And, it's like, oh, this is interesting. This is different. But over time, definitely lost that. My whole sort of spiel at Everyman and, work talking with men was just like helping and teaching men to connect with each other and not be isolated. but I've also just naturally found myself more isolated as each kid has come along. Plus the pandemic. Yeah, this last couple of years of 3 kids plus pandemic and post-pandemic. Yeah, man, it's been more lonely than I've ever been used to being, honestly.
Yeah.
So yeah, friendships, fun. Yeah.
You have to actively work on that stuff, right? Like it just doesn't keep happening. You have to like fit it into the crevices, you know? That's really interesting. And then it also kind of dovetails, and we've talked about this, and there's a lot written about this, but you know, we're more connected than ever, but also more isolated than ever.
Yeah. Hollow.
Yeah. Exactly. I probably know the answer to this question, but what are some of the ways that you recharge your batteries or center yourself? Sounds like that meditation retreat was a much needed one. Are there other things you try to do on a daily or weekly basis to kind of center?
Meditation for sure is having that retreat, and then sort of refreshing my daily practice is a big deal. I have the world's best IFS therapist, internal family systems therapist, that is just a real important weekly touch point for me to have someone and somewhere to go to really get into things. Again, along with the meditation, of sort of re-upping my daily yoga practice, or leaning back into like a daily yoga practice. But I also I would try to go to the gym 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, and I either swim or swing kettlebells or do different things. And, you know, for me, the like active self-care a lot of times feel like it just drains my battery even a little bit more. So what I've found for myself is really to like take care and be okay. Things like quiet time, alone time in nature, meditation are what I personally require to like keep my baseline okay. I need to work out to stay healthy and be okay and all that. But I've just found for me the output of energy. I mean, I don't know if it's like for you, but man, my days are 16-hour, you know, it's like a nonstop thing from kids waking up to kids going to bed. And so I just need that real restorative focus for myself.
That makes sense. Yeah. Last couple for you. What would you say is a mistake you've made as a father?
I would tell you one yesterday is my temper just like leapt out of me yesterday. My middle son, Jude, there's this combination of like not listening and talking back that has like peaked recently. Yeah. And man, I thought I was in a good place. I thought I was in a good mood. I thought things were all right, but it just like, 0 to 100, man, just real fast, and sucks. It sucks. Like I'm a big dude and I'm a loud dude. And like when that happens and I see him like shaking, like it's just, fuck, I hate that. So, I mean, that's a small one. A big mistake I made was how I handled and mishandled myself and decisions with the launching and creation of Everyman. So I didn't really say this, but I got fired from my media job the month after my first son was born, and lost a substantially strong income without really preparing. And then like kind of wildly launched a men's retreat that turned into Everyman right after. And I had never been entrepreneurial before. I had no trust in myself there, and then just didn't trust myself, or didn't know how to trust myself to set things up in a way that would have worked. Because what happened was a business on the outward side that got a lot of press and a lot of attention and made little to no money. And so I put my family through a pretty rough couple years there of trying to piece things together. And meanwhile, like doing my passionate best work in the world, and then need to sort of scramble to make ends meet was confusing, and not ill intention, but certainly had a lot of repercussions.
Yeah. I want to go back to the thing that you mentioned about yesterday, like losing your temper. What do you do to recover and repair when that happens? Because it happens to all of us. I don't think there's a dad on this show who hasn't alluded to something like that happening to them. And so I want to talk more about the recovery aspect, and maybe even the recovery aspect from that couple of years that you put your family through with Everyman, and like all the kind of change and chaos and stuff there.
Well, the recovery from the temper, I mean, if I just describe it, was I caught it real fast. It didn't take me too long, and immediately knelt down And I don't know, probably said something like, hey man, that was way too big, way too out of line. I can see I scared you pretty bad. I'm really fucking sorry. I probably even said fucking. Like, I just like, I am really sorry. And, he came in and got a hug. We gave a big hug. But then I also looped back at least once, maybe even twice or even 3 times, just to sort of like reaffirm the my bad, like not okay, not cool.
Yeah.
I don't think I like overstressed it in an unhealthy way, but I don't know, a crow, like really like try to get really clear that it wasn't cool. And then, I don't know, attempt to appropriately say, hey, the talking back thing, like it's super gnarly and hard too, so like try to address both sides, I guess.
Yeah.
The repair for the big, long mistakes I've made, I don't know, it seems like it's a ratio of twice long to repair, like the amount of time, something like that, One of the things I did was just really cut back on work travel, like it's like substantially, right? That was one of the parts that was really hard, was that I was leading retreats and I was gone a lot. And honestly, the pandemic was a real blessing for our marriage and family, because it just put a halt to it for a while. Yeah. And then I kind of hung with that halt, just like, it's humbling to, in some ways be very plugged into being a dad and identifying with it and trying hard at it, but also, make some like substantially harmful maneuvers along the way.
Yeah.
And just sort of doing my part. Another big one, I guess I would say, is as aware as I've tried to be about sharing the workload with my wife and like supporting all of the things. Like, actually, I'm going to re-answer a question that, like, if I would tell myself one thing, it would say, get the hell up at night with your wife, with the baby. And I flubbed that one for quite a while. And that might take, I don't know that we'll recover from that one, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing these mistakes and your attempt to recover or your recovery from them. So I wanted to end and ask you, Dan, how can people follow along or be helpful to you on your journey?
Yeah, thanks, man. We're on Instagram. Our social media is mostly on Instagram. It's Fatherhood Unlocked is our handle. We have a weekly newsletter. We have a website, fatherhoodready.com, and a website, Fatherhood Unlocked. And just to name it, what we're doing is we're starting with expecting dads, right? We have some resources to really help fix acute problems. We have our big comprehensive online course, but where we're headed with all this is a community, right? Like there is such a... Actually, you mentioned it in our conversation here about how like we can't go to our dads about questions about fatherhood, right? Yeah. So we really have to turn toward each other, So like it's like we either do this completely alone or what, right? And so the or what that we're working toward is really building a community of fathers. And so, you can support us by being aware and, sharing these new resources with expecting parents and expecting dads, and honestly, just sort of like leaning in to this not fully fleshed out movement, I think, that is dads really, stepping in and stepping up and doing our part in, I don't know, our families as things evolve, And I think we have a wait list started for the community. So if there's dads that are, vibing here and keen to get in touch with each other and get in touch with us, like there's stuff coming down the road where there's going to be community for dads to get together.
Love that. And I'm sure many, many people who listen to this will be interested to get involved and be part of it. So thank you, Dan. Do you have a few minutes for our lightning round?
Absolutely.
Okay. Simple rules. I ask you a question. You respond with the first thing that comes to mind. It's a judgment-free zone. We move on to the next question. All right, here we go. Finish this sentence. The ideal day with my kids involves this one activity.
Swimming in a river.
All right. Which one of your kids is your favorite?
Wilderness.
The youngest one always wins, by the way. This is true. What is your go-to dad wardrobe?
What I'm wearing, a black t-shirt and sweat shorts.
Similar, except today I'm in blue. Have you ever pretended to be asleep to avoid a middle of the night wake up?
Uh-huh.
He says very quietly.
Uh-huh.
Have you ever secretly thrown away a piece of your kid's artwork? Or maybe not so secretly?
Oh, lots of them. Yeah.
What is your favorite kids movie?
Moana, by far.
Oh, good one. There's a sequel coming out.
I know. I'm super excited.
Me too. What nostalgic movie can you just not wait to force your kids to watch with you?
Oh, we just did it. The Princess Bride.
Oh, love it. One of my all-time faves.
We're gonna be characters for Halloween, the whole family. We're gonna do a whole ensemble Halloween.
I love that. Are you gonna be
Fezzik?
Okay, got it. I love that. Princess Bride is a great one. I used to go to my grandparents' house and they had a bunch of movies on VHS tape, and that was one of them. And I would watch that every time, multiple times I went to their house. So our kids also love that one. And finally, you have 3 children, but you do live in the wilds of Maine. What is your take on minivans?
Oh, we have one. We have a great one. We have a Chrysler hybrid
Excellent.
plug-in.
The Pacifica?
Yeah. Yeah. It's rad.
Yeah. We got Team Minivan over here. Love that. It's a very polarizing topic. So I'm glad to hear you're on the bus, or the minivan, rather. All right, Dan. Thank you so much. That concludes our rapid fire lightning round. I so appreciate you coming on the show today, and we will link to all of your things, including Fatherhood Ready, which I hope a lot of people who listen to this become a part of.
Thanks, Adam. Great to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to today's conversation with Dan Doty. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, share, and leave me a review on Apple or Spotify. It'll help other people find this podcast. Startup Dad is a Fishman AF production with editing support from Tommy Heron. You can join a community of 11,000 subscribers and stay up to date on my thoughts on growth, product, and parenting by subscribing to the Fishman AF newsletter at www.fishmanafnewsletter.com. Thanks for listening. See you next week.